Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference kicking off today. Let's get out to Cupertino, California for more with Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley.
Yeah, Josh, we're here at Cupertino's or Apple's campus in Cupertino, California. They just wrapped up their WWDC keynote where Tim Cook took the stage. The big announcements out of the show: a whole new redesign for the operating systems that support Apple's products. That's iOS, which runs the iPhone, Mac OS, iPad OS, Watch OS. They're all getting a new design that resembles kind of glass. Now, this is going to be kind of the thing that Apple is leaning on to help push sales of its phones when it comes out. They've renamed all of their operating systems. Now it's no longer iOS 19 or 18. It's going to be iOS 26 based on the year that it's mostly out. It'll come out later this year, but it'll mostly be out in 2026. One of the other big announcements is that the iPad now is actually truly useful as a laptop replacement. So that's a huge change for Apple. The one downside, though, is that there were very few major AI updates. Now, they wove Apple Intelligence, their AI platform, throughout the presentation, but didn't really give us a huge splashy announcement like we saw at Google I/O or Microsoft's Build. Now, they mentioned Siri and how they're still working on that, trying to update that and bring it to life, the more personalized Siri that's got generative AI power, but we didn't see that. They did have some generative AI announcements that were interesting, but it'll be, we'll have to see what Wall Street says as they digest the news and kind of take into account the fact that they're still not ready for that next generation Siri yet.
Apple's big software show, Ben, it kicked off today. You were listening. What did you make of what you heard, Ben? Did you hear anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest surprise, obviously, as you guys pointed out, was the iPad update. I think a lot of people have been looking for what we'll just say more pro-level features to the iPad. So that's things around multitasking, some of the better file management. I mean, candidly, I think people wanted iPad to be more like a Mac, and I think that's really what they did. Now you've got this sort of multimodal opportunity, use the best of iPad, have some of those Mac features built in to do a lot more productivity or even heavy work versus light work, right? Which has sort of been the debate. Wasn't really surprised about any of the larger UI schemes. And I think there was just more clarity here around where Apple's priorities are in terms of eliminating friction, making these features more helpful. And I thought, while yes, not really a whole lot around kind of the front end of AI, so like how you would interact with it, there's a lot of back end of AI that's happening from Apple. I think they've been talking about this for years, just not saying it's something like Apple Intelligence. And at a fundamental level, at exposing what's useful or making AI useful at a system level, and then for developers, is kind of the theme where I think we're now at that foundation that they'll build upon that type of a strategy, from a back end at a system level.
Ben, all of this sounds pretty incremental, right? Not necessarily retail customer facing, to your point. Does this move the needle at all in terms of a refresh cycle?
I mean, I think the refresh cycle is just going to stay standard like it is. I don't think we're going to see a fundamental change to any of those forecasts or any of this kind of pull in. Again, I think the dynamic between iPad as a productivity device, even its opportunities in enterprise, they obviously sell, north of 10 million, plus iPads per quarter. That's a good unit volume. I think, expanding that, making it more attractive across the vector will be super interesting to see when it comes to hardware sales. But we're still not expecting, and I didn't expect any of this to change our opinion of, just the refresh cycle staying as it is. iPhone's relatively flat. We don't really see that changing. And to be honest, like we've talked about before, I'm not sure we ever see kind of this upgrade, super cycle like we have before, AI or not.
So what Ben, if you don't get that super cycle, what drives this stock higher? What gets investors excited?
I mean, I think there's a combination of the device categories that they're in, right? So I think looking at other areas, I've always been bullish on Mac and the enterprise. I think they have a lot of upside there. I'm now more, bullish on iPad's opportunity, or iPad Pro, which was a small volume of overall iPad shipments to go into that Pro category. So I think there's ancillary hardware. I think there comes a time, right, we're just not there yet, where they're setting the stage and this foundation leads to what they will do with a AR, VR, whatever we want to call that category, smart AI glasses. We're just not there yet. But that's why I come back to the foundation that's being laid for the next 10 years, both software and hardware. And I think you're seeing some of those seeds right now be planted in these new versions of the software for the platforms.
I've heard, Ben, some analysts make the following argument. I'm just curious to get your take on it. I think it was the team at Evercore who said this, they were making the case that, listen, AI, basically Apple's playing a different AI game, was their point. And to paraphrase, their argument was, listen, Apple is not spending billions and billions and billions on AI CapEx. That's the Meta, Microsoft, Google way to approach this. Apple, they said, it's a different strategy. They stay capital light and then charging a fee to model providers for access to all those iOS users. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that falls into the services revenue part of this camp. I mean, I think if you just look at, again, they're going to have a partner. And I think when you look at the things they did around iOS here, you see a lot more ChatGPT integration, meaning where they hand off a query or a natural language request into a broader LLM, in this case ChatGPT. That's still expensive, whether it's them or whether it's Google. It's not free or cheap to do that. So I do think they'll have some monetization opportunities where they can share in those revenues across vendor. And it does feel right now like let's call this AI as a service, that them plus ChatGPT presents an opportunity. So I can see that as, again, a services revenue kind of increase, again, bringing more of that functionality on the back end to make this more useful, right? Make AI useful, not necessarily just about a chatbot, which is sort of what gets talked about or lumped into AI today.
Final question, Ben. This big software show, it's aimed at developers, those millions and millions of Apple developers all around the world. And the point is, hey, you all should stay excited about building those killer apps and experiences for the Apple ecosystem. Do you think Apple did a good job of that today, convincing those developers to, yes, stay excited?
Yeah, I mean, I think the energy was good. Obviously what gets lost in the keynote, which we saw here in person, was some of the developer energy around some of the announcements. There was a good positive reaction to, the announcement that Apple was going to open up its foundational models to developers, something I thought would happen last year, but, has happened this year, which means they can now take advantage of private cloud compute, some of those foundational models, and build them back into their apps, which again is back to my point of enabling this at a back end so that developers can start to make AI useful using some of these techniques of on-device that Apple is exposing. And I think that's still a strong story, but developer reaction to that was positive. And again, just being here, you can still sense a lot of excitement, a lot of developer energy. They want to start making these new classifications of apps that are going to start to use AI, again, for these helpful, anticipatory, beneficial experiences to their software. So I sense it. I don't sense that that's waning in any way. And I think they're all excited about, what comes next in software development. And I think they're excited about Apple's platforms to do that.